beg to move that this House to now adjourn.
The question is that this House to now adjourn. Saqib Bhatti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's like I've not been away. I stand today to make the case for accident and emergency services in Solihull Borough. Ever since I was first elected in 2019, through COVID to now in 2025, I've campaigned for better health resources in my constituency and across Solihull Borough. Like many across the country, I'm grateful for the National Health Service. Indeed, I owe my life to the NHS. Having fallen seriously ill as a child at the age of 3, it was an NHS doctor who saved my life after my parents had been told that I had mere hours to live, and it was NHS nurses who cared for me. When my children were born, it was NHS nurses who delivered them and NHS doctors who cared for them and for my wife. And of course, I, like many of my constituents, am ever grateful for the NHS staff who were on the front line during the pandemic in, one can only imagine, the most difficult of circumstances. So I'm proud to stand up for the NHS, and I'm proud to stand up for the NHS in my constituency of Meriden and Solihull East. And I've been fortunate to have campaigned for a number of successful outcomes in the borough of Solihull, where we have a positive story to tell across the borough. I supported the introduction of integrated care systems in the Health and Care Act 2022, and as I said to the then Health Secretary, it was clear to me that what we needed was a structure where we could have more structures and organisations that could be more accountable to the public, and the Birmingham and Solihull Integrated Care Board was born as a result of that piece of legislation. The Solihull Conservatives led a campaign to get a new urgent treatment centre, and our petition garnered over 11,000 signatures, and I'm pleased that the UTC at Solihull Hospital was opened in 2023 and has been so important in easing pressures on local services and is vital for local residents. Indeed, I have also used the UTC for myself and my family. We've also had new elective surgery units that have been built with state-of-the-art robotics, and I'm delighted that just a few weeks ago they reached their 1,000th operation. On top of this, the brand new locality hub at Solihull Hospital aims to provide early intervention and urgent response care for patients in the borough. Again, this will be vital in providing much needed relief on local services. Alongside this, we have a brand new community diagnostic centre that I secured for North Solihull, and that is now currently being built. I had the pleasure of visiting the new facility that is forecast to deliver almost 116,000 diagnostic appointments, including MRIs, ultrasounds and much more. So as the Minister will see as I make progress, we have got a strong track record of delivering health services for our constituents in the borough of Solihull. But if there is one thing that is lacking, it is clear when I talk to local residents in my constituency that Solihull Borough needs accident and emergency services. Madam Deputy Speaker, Solihull Hospital used to have an A&E which was closed in 2013. A recent write-up of my campaign by the Solihull Observer correctly identified, saying that historically Solihull did have an A&E department, but in 2013 hospital bosses admitted that there had not been a full and proper A&E for many, many years, spanning over decades, with A&E services dwindling bit by bit over 2 decades. And as the Minister will note from my speech, things have seriously changed. Solihull Hospital, first of all, is thriving. And I'm pleased that there's been a collective recognition that Solihull Hospital must be nurtured and it must be preserved. However, Solihillians in need of medical treatment or help with broken bones, sprains, cuts, stomach pains, rashes and minor burns can always book an appointment at the urgent treatment centre that I spoke about at the Lode Lane Hospital. But anything more serious, residents are redirected to Heartlands Hospital in Bordsley Green. At any given time, that journey, I will give way.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to him for giving way, and may I congratulate him on securing tonight's debate. I draw attention to my register of interest and my background in the GMB trade union, which represents ambulance workers at West Midlands Ambulance Service. Does he agree that during a very difficult winter period, ambulance staff did endure an extremely difficult time, and we should all pay tribute to their professionalism during that extremely difficult winter period? And does he further agree with ambulance crews that if we did have more community-based health services, then pressure on those central accident and emergency centres would be reduced?
Well, thank you, Honourable Member, for that point. I think it makes a very important point. Every winter we see the strain on our health services, and of course all our professionals and the hospitals and the ambulance services made a very important contribution, and they always do. I think the second part of his question, though, is really a question for the government, and I will start to talk about that a little bit more in terms of what is the future vision for my constituents and, of course, his constituents too. I absolutely will.
Can I comment on what Meriden and Solihull East for bringing this forward. I share his concerns when I look at my constituency and the neighbouring constituency where the A&E in both Northdown and Ards hospitals were closed and all moved to Dundaln. Put pressure on the Dundaln hospital as well. But does the honourable member not agree that when you get to the A&E at Dundaln as an example, and perhaps Solihull is the same, if you have to wait 14 hours to be seen for your heart attack issue, then the issue means that the A&E has to be up to scratch. Travelling's one thing, but the A&E also has to be able to respond. And does he feel that if you're going to have an A&E, it has to be the right one?
Well, I can't disagree with him at all on that. I think it's a really valid point. And of course, it's not just about the travel time, it's the time that is spent there. And as you will see, there is discussion about the A&E at Heartlands, which I'll come on to, which has similar issues. I will give way.
On that note about time waiting in A&E, one issue we found in Winchester is that a significant proportion of the caseload are people with mental health issues, sometimes in a mental health crisis, and they're already on a waiting list. And with mental health waiting lists sometimes hitting 18 months to 2 years from being referred for the specialist sort of treatment that you need, it's putting a huge amount of pressure on our A&E departments and takes a huge amount of resources to deal with mental health crises. So would the member agree with me that investing heavily in mental health services will actually also help reduce A&E waiting times?
Well, of course, investment will make a big difference, and that's why I think the Integrated Care Boards play an important role, because there is accountability all the way up to the Minister, and it's also about how local resources are distributed locally as for the needs of the community. I talked about the journey to Heartlands Hospital. At any given time, Madam Deputy Speaker, that journey could take 40 minutes and quite regularly takes over an hour. And in a situation where every minute matters, where I'm afraid that just isn't good enough for my constituents, because it could quite literally be a matter of life or death. Solihull Borough itself has a population of approximately 216,000 people. That is only set to grow.
Will my honourable friend give way? I'm grateful for my honourable friend giving way. I'm also grateful for him bringing this debate to the Chamber. He and I have been working very closely on this issue, being neighbouring MPs, and he notes the size of Solihull Borough, but of course with the government's housing plans, that is likely to increase significantly, almost touching 250,000. Does he agree in those circumstances it's absolutely critical that we have an A&E provision within the borough to service the community?
I thank my honourable friend for that contribution and also all the work he's done on this. I know he launched a petition, which I'll come on to as well. And he's absolutely right. That's exactly the point I was going to come on to, which is that the Minister's own government has set out its planning reforms, which means valuable and precious greenbelt will now be built on as the housing numbers are massively increased in putting, housing numbers are massively increased, putting our local infrastructure under strain. And as we can see on a cross-party basis, that is a concern across the country. My honourable friend has made significant progress in talking to his constituents about this issue, and I know his constituents feel exactly the same way, and I look forward to working with him. Significantly, Madam Deputy Speaker, over 40% of our residents are reportedly over the age of 50. And as we go through this especially cold winter, as the member for Northfield said, we all remember that winter is not only a challenging time for the NHS, it's also incredibly difficult for our constituents. And cold and flu cases are at their peak and place additional pressures on the NHS. And every Christmas, there's a timely reminder that we're in desperate need of an A&E at Solihull. So I'm really grateful that I've been able to secure this debate early into the new year. And in addition, and while today I won't focus on social care, I can assure the Minister at some point I will return to that topic in the future. I simply make the point that kicking the can down the road on issues like social care will cause further anxiety to my constituents and exacerbate the strain on our hospitals. And all governments of all ilks need to deal with the issue of social care. The government's response does not deal with it, nor does it deal with the issue of the ageing population that we have across the country, especially in my constituency, like Meriden and Solihull East. And the long-term social care issues on our local NHS are made far worse when the fact that there's an average of 14% more attendees at A&Es nationally than there were 10 years ago, which means that more people are now facing longer waiting times. As of August 2024, 65.4% of patients at Birmingham Solihull ICB spent less than 4 hours in major A&E departments, which is markedly below the NHS's target of 95%. So I hope the Minister might be able to comment on what her further thinking is in terms of getting that number up. And I think I've adequately set out already, but it's worth repeating. Residents in my borough have to travel to different areas to access A&E services. And given the size of the local population and the likelihood that demand for emergency services will only increase further, it is obvious that Solihull residents need to be supported by dedicated A&E services. This is because the dedicated A&E in Solihull Borough will take pressure off other A&E departments, lowering waiting times across the whole area for the benefit of thousands of people in the West Midlands. Can the Minister give any indication as to whether she's considered these arguments in previous correspondence that I and my honourable friend, the member for Solihull West and Shirley, has had with her? Moreover, my constituents and I are very concerned that this issue will become increasingly pressing because of the government's planning changes and the potential changes to the national policy planning framework. And if the government were to achieve the objective of removing consent from local people, the demand for local infrastructure will go up, from schools to roads and to health services, which will inevitably become unsustainable. Now, I launched my petition in May last year to restore A&E services to Solihull Hospital. I can confirm to the Minister, I did not know there was going to be a general election called a week later, and within a week we had about 1,000 signatures. I've had about 1,600. I looked to my honourable friend, I think he's had a similar amount, so we're reaching over 3,000 residents who've supported our campaign, and the petition remains open on our websites for further support. And I want to assure my constituents in Meriden and Solihull East that I will not falter and waver in my resolve to see this campaign through. And look, let me help the Minister on this. I understand that these kind of projects don't happen overnight, but surely the Minister will agree that a case like this has to be looked at. There has to be a long-term vision, a long-term plan where we can start to deal with the issues such as increased population, which are clearly coming down the road. And when my honourable friend and I wrote to the Minister in November, we outlined these arguments for the enhanced healthcare provision for Solihull Borough. We were disappointed with the Minister's response, which failed to cover some of the assertions that we wanted, which is why I put in for the adjournment debate. I'd like to give the Minister another chance on this, because it cannot be possible that she doesn't have a view on the long-term health provision for my constituents. And the Minister for Clarity argued that the NHS Birmingham Solihull ICB were responsible for funding and implementation in the area. I'm sure that's a matter of fact, but she must have a view, even though they also will be playing a decisive role in decision-making on these matters. And it would be really helpful to my constituents and the constituents of my honourable friend from Solihull West and Shirley if the Minister was at least in principle agreeing to look at our plans, even if she doesn't quite support them today. So will she agree to look at the long-term need for my constituents, especially in light of the extra housing that is, the government is going to be demanding to be delivered on our green belt? And as a result of that extra building, and it's a point worth making, my constituents will be making huge amounts of sacrifices. The least the government could do is recognise that and provide the infrastructure to match. The Minister also confirmed that they were committed to delivering the new hospital plan, and that she said that the Chancellor has confirmed that in the budget that there would be a £3.1 billion increase in the overall departmental budget for capital expenditure over this year in next. And I know the Secretary of State was committed in his piece in the Evening Standard in June to delivering the new hospitals programme. And while, of course, I was disappointed that there was no mention of Solihull Borough in his statement last week, I did want to ask the Minister the very simple question. The government set out plans that take hospital building to 2039. Does that mean now that my constituents and our constituents in Solihull Borough won't now get a look-in from this Labour government until then? 15 years before we can even start to think about new plans to support Solihull Borough. I think it would be really helpful to get clarity on that. In our correspondence, the Honourable Member for Solihull West and Shirley made the case for that £3 billion uplift and part of that capital budget to be spent in our area. The Minister should be assured that we will take every opportunity in this House to make the case for an A&E in Solihull. So will she now instruct her officials to take a long, hard look at this and take a constructive view on the long-term plan? Indeed, just a few days ago, and this is the point I wanted to come to when the Honourable Member intervened on me, it was reported in the Birmingham Mail that the UHB Trust is now looking for a £200 million investment to create a new urgent and emergency care facility at Heartlands Hospital, because there are, and these are the quotes from the finance papers, that because the facilities are disconnected and inefficient, existing patient services and patient numbers continue to increase, being cared for in buildings which are dark, cramped and not fit for the current purpose. It could not be clearer, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this report really begs the question, why should my constituents be subject to those conditions? They deserve better. They deserve the very best of health facilities. And of course, as I've said, I will not let up, nor will my honourable friend for Solihull West and Shirley, and we will keep coming back. With over 3,000 people having signed petitions, does the Minister agree, and will she do the right thing and back our campaign for a new A&E in Solihull? Now, when I did raise this issue on the floor of the House, the Health Secretary wanted to know where I would spend the money differently. Perhaps the Minister has a similar line in her speech. And look, this isn't a party political point. We would have chosen not to have spent billions on trade union sweetheart deals for nothing in return. And we wouldn't probably have spent money on billions on GB Energy, which will not deliver the outcomes nor reduce bills. That money, those billions of pounds, could have paid for an A&E in Solihull many, many times over. Madam Deputy Speaker, politics is all about choices. So I asked the Minister, will she do the right thing, and will she choose to engage constructively so we can deliver the best outcome for our constituents?
Order, order.
Beg to move that this House to now adjourn.
Minister Karin Smyth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I congratulate the Honourable for Meriden and Solihull East for securing this debate, and for other colleagues for taking part. And I want to start by thanking our NHS staff at Solihull Hospital for their remarkable effort, stamina and care in the most challenging of circumstances. I think the point well made by the Honourable Gentleman, and I know he feels passionately that he owes his own life and the lives of many others to their care. The Honourable Gentleman says that he didn't want to make political points and politics about choices, but we did inherit, Madam Deputy Speaker, as you know, the state of the NHS, the worst knowledge in its history, and I hope he does agree with the diagnosis by Lord Darcy. We still haven't heard from his colleagues if they do agree, but the state of the capital estate, as well as services, is something that I think has shocked the country, despite the result of the election, and we are full scale at making that situation better. He is right that politics is about choices, and I think the wrong choices were made absolutely in the last 14 years. They are, it is right to point to the increase in demand for emergency departments in Solihull and elsewhere over the past decade. Part of which can be explained by the appalling neglect of GP and primary care services to manage demand, and the failure of all parties, which I think the Honourable Gentleman did allude to build consensus on a long-term solution for social care and support the flow of people through those hospitals. Solihull Borough, as he knows, is within the University Hospitals Birmingham NHS Foundation Trust, and in December, 58.2% of people were seen within 4 hours. And setting out some of the wider context of this debate, we need to remember that we have had one of the busiest flu seasons for a number of years, and although those cases are coming down, norovirus cases are still 80% higher than the same period last year. And we absolutely want to end what has become normal, and that is the treatment of people in corridors. It's completely unacceptable. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has made clear, this is not the level of care staff want for their patients, and it's not the level of care this government will ever accept for patients. It will take time to get back to the standards that patients deserve, but it can be done. We did it before in government, and we will do it again. To mitigate pressures in Solihull and elsewhere, we are reforming the NHS to shift the focus of healthcare out of hospital into the community, freeing up beds for emergency patients and preventing so many people having to call an ambulance or go to A&E in the first place. In the last 2 months, we've announced steps to begin rebuilding general practice and immediate long-term action in social care. In November 2024, I understand NHS Birmingham and Solihull ICB had an average of 6.3 full-time doctors in general practice per 10,000 patients, just above the average in England, which stands at 6. A few short weeks after the election, we announced an extra £82 million of funding to increase access to GPs, and it is improving. In the Birmingham and Solihull Integrated Care Board area, I understand there were 30 more GPs in November compared to July. So I hope that situation has been felt by his constituents. Additionally, in December, we announced an extra 88 £888 million in funding for GPs, the biggest funding uplift in years, alongside a package of reforms to bust bureaucracy, slash unnecessary targets and give them more time to spend with patients as a first step to bringing back the family doctor. And as well as considering demand, we know there's no solution for accident and emergency activity that doesn't include fixing our broken social care system. Today, there are around 12,000 patients in hospital beds who have no criteria to reside but can't be discharged. The main reason for these delays is capacity issues. And over 300 of the patients in that category were within the Birmingham and Solihull ICB. So I hope him and all honourable members do work with us to resolve that situation. But that is why this government is making up to £3.7 billion of extra funding available for local authorities to provide social care, while we are delivering an extra 7,800 adaptions through the Disabled Facilities Grant this year and next year, and why we've delivered the biggest increase in carers allowance since the 1970s, worth an extra $2,300 to family carers, while we're introducing fair pay agreements to tackle the 131,000 vacancies we inherited for care workers, and why we're appointing Louise Casey to develop a national consensus on that long-term solution for social care. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's also clear that we can get our ambulance and A&E services working better. So before the spring, we will set out the lessons learned from this winter and the improvements that we'll put in place ahead of next winter. And we're very content to visit and hear from honourable members across this House about the situation in their areas. Now, he talks about the 2022 Act. I was part of that committee too. I put forward a number of suggestions for better accountability of ICBs to local members of Parliament, most of which weren't accepted by the government of the time. But I do agree with him that those organisations need to be more accountable to himself and other members of Parliament representing their constituents. We do expect the integrated care boards to ensure the areas they run are safe, putting the necessary care in the community, investing in technology and doing what's best for the people they are responsible for. This government is investing an extra £26 billion in our health and care services while undertaking fundamental reform to help the ICB deliver the services that all our constituents expect. If the ICB intends to make substantial changes to the way they deliver services, they must conduct a public consultation and must meet the test to ensure that all proposals are proven to be in the interests of patients and the wider public. Now, I know the honourable gentleman will be meeting the ICB in a few weeks' time, and I'm sure he will continue to make his points to them, and I suspect they are watching or listening to our proceedings today. But I'm sure, as he would agree, it is for the people locally in Solihull to determine how their interests are best served. Ministers cannot impose views above the heads of the local ICB. Those decisions are best made in Solihull by people who live in Solihull and not in Westminster. So what I can do, and what this government is doing, is giving ICBs the means to deliver services while undertaking fundamental reform of how those services are delivered. So the honourable member is doing exactly what I think he's doing exactly what he should do as an experienced member of Parliament, and making his case to the local ICB. I'm sure they will have heard him this evening, and his voice will be important in representing his constituents. Can I just add, in terms of planning, as mentioned also by his neighbour, the member for Solihull Western Shirley, he's entirely right to raise the issue of population growth and planning. We are committed to house building, unlike, I'm afraid, his government. It is important that that goes ahead. It does put pressure on services, and unfortunately one of the issues under the previous government about those developments not going ahead is the infrastructure issue. That is something that we are addressing. The disconnect between ICBs and local authorities does have to change. A situation that's gone on for far too long with vital infrastructure like schools and hospitals, which is why we're committed to working with colleagues at MHCLG to make sure that the planning does include basic infrastructure, and the Secretary of State for Health has regular meetings with the Deputy Prime Minister to ensure we're all pulling in the same direction on that. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, communities across the country, including the Honourable Gentleman's constituent Solihull, are struggling with poor services and crumbling estates. We are putting record capital funding into the NHS while reforming services to make sure every penny of that money is spent well. We will return to 95% of patients being seen within 4 hours at A&E. We will get waiting lists back down to where they were in 2010, and we will fix the front door to the NHS with the kind of GP services that all our constituents deserve. It will take time, but we will deliver an NHS and national care service that provide people with the care they need when they need it, and we will continue to work with all honourable members across this House to make sure that happens.
The question is that this House to now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Order, order.